What's going on, guys? Tom here, and in today's video I'm going to be teaching you how to add some simple enemy AI to your first person shooter game. So let's get started. Okay, as always, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come and open our Godot engine. And in the project manager, you're going to look for your FPS tutorial, you're going to click and press edit. Now if you haven't been following along with the previous video tutorials, then head on over to the GitHub page, the link is in the description below, and you can download the entire source code that you need to get started with this project right here. Now you'll notice if you have been following along that the scene view here is slightly different from what we left off in episode 3, and that is purely just because I've added some extra things here so that going forward we'll have a bit of a nicer scene to work with when we start adding enemies and collectibles and all sorts of other things. So again, if you don't have this current setup here, head on over to the GitHub page, link in the description below, and you can get all of this ready to go. Once you've done that, come on back to the video. Okay, so to begin, you can see we've got our player character over here, and if we click on the play button, you'll notice that we can look around, we can move around, and we can jump, just like we left off in the previous video. The first thing we're going to do to start adding some simple enemy AI is we're actually going to click on the player object here, and we're going to go into the scene by clicking on this scene view button here. We're going to click on the root node that says player, and over on the right hand side where it says node, we're going to come across to groups, and we're going to add this player to a group. Now I've got this in a player group here. I'm just going to delete that, and we're going to start that again. We're going to say player, and I've added a capital P there, and bear in mind that the capitalization of the group names is important. So we're going to click add, and that is putting this player in the player group there. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go back into our world scene, and we're actually going to create a brand new scene now for our enemy. So what I'm going to do is inside the res folder here, I'm going to create a new folder. We're going to call it enemy. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to create new scene. And again, we're just going to call this enemy. It's a 3D scene, and the root node, again, we're just going to call enemy. And then underneath here, I'm going to add a couple of child nodes. We're going to have a mesh instance. Now this mesh instance is going to be the capsule that represents the enemy. So over on the right in the inspector, we're going to click on mesh, and we're going to click new capsule mesh. Now again, you'll notice that the capsule is rotated on its side, just like the player one was. So we're going to come across to transform on the right hand side, and we're just going to rotate this by 90 degrees on the x-axis. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to right click, add another node, again a mesh instance, and this time we're going to create a cube mesh. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to scale this down and then scale it across, and then we're going to move it up and we're going to move it forward. Well, let's just rotate that there. Let's just scale this down as well. Now what we're doing this for is we're just creating some sort of a reference point to show us which way the enemy is facing. So wherever that cube sticking out the front is, that's going to show us that that's the direction that the enemy is facing. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add another child node, and this time we're going to add a collision shape. We're going to create that, and here what we're going to do is we're going to add a capsule shape, and again on the transform we're going to rotate that by 90 degrees, and that just means that the player will be able to shoot at the enemy and it will be able to receive collisions. Finally, what we're going to do is we are going to change the type of this node, change type, and we're just going to set it to a kinematic body. Okay, so that is our player set up. Also what we're going to do actually there is on the mesh instance, we're going to come over to the material. We're going to give it a new spatial material, and you'll see why we're doing this in a little while, but we're going to come down to the albedo, and for the color we're just going to give it a green color. So 0 on the R, 255 on the green, and 0 on the blue. And that just gives it a nice green color, and again you'll see why we're doing that a little bit later on in the tutorial. Okay, so that's our enemy. We're going to come back into the world scene, and we're just going to drop that enemy into the scene. Now you'll notice here that he's facing the opposite direction to the player. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on the enemy, and I'm going to rotate it just so that it's sort of facing in the same direction as the player. And what you will notice there is when I drag that into the scene, it actually nested itself underneath the player there. If it does that for you, you're going to want to drag that out so it's sitting underneath the world node itself and not underneath the player. Okay, so if we play that, you'll see that we have this enemy. He's actually floating in the air at the moment. So what we can do is we can just click on him there and let's just move him down a little bit. All right, cool. So we have our player and we have our enemy. Our enemy doesn't really do anything at the moment. So let's start adding some enemy AI into this. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to come back into the enemy scene. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a collision area for this enemy to detect the player within. And we're going to do that in a sort of field of view fashion. So what I mean by that is we're going to come across to the enemy and add a child node. And here we're going to have an area. Now you'll notice at the bottom here it says a general purpose area node for detection and 3D physics influence. Now the detection part is what we're really interested in. So we're going to create that. And underneath this, again, here you'll see this little warning triangle, which we've seen before. And it says that this node has no shape, so it can't collide. Consider adding a collision shape or a collision polygon. Now, whereas normally we would use a collision shape, for this, I'm actually going to use a collision polygon. So we're going to add a child. And just like it said, we're going to choose collision polygon. We're going to create that. And you'll notice that we can't really see it. It's not really added anything. What we actually need to do is we need to come over to the right hand side where it says polygon and click on where it says pool vector to array. Now we're going to need 3 array points here. So we're going to click up a couple of times until we get our 3 points. And we're going to define these 3 points. So the first one, we're going to keep at 0, 0. The second one, we're going to say 15 on the X and 6 on the Y. And the second one, we're going to say 15 on the X and minus 6 on the Y. Now you'll notice what that's done is it's kind of created a blue sort of collision area here. And what we're going to do is we're going to transform this. We're going to say minus 90 on the X-axis. Now you'll notice that's made a sort of cone shape, which is perfect for what we need in terms of detecting the player within a cone of view. Now you'll also notice that it's sticking out the side of the enemy here. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on the area and we're going to come to the rotation tool and we're just going to rotate that 90 degrees. And one final thing to note here is that you can see that this is sort of sticking through the enemy a little bit. So I'm going to take the move tool and I'm just going to hold shift and drag it across ever so slightly just until it's no longer colliding with the enemy itself. Now the reason we do that is so that the enemy doesn't detect itself and start trying to chase itself or however or whatever AI we're actually going to implement here. Okay, so the collision area is done. What we are now going to do is we're going to come and create an enemy script. So inside our enemy node, we're going to right click and we're going to attach a script. We're going to leave all this as default. So enemy GD, press create. We're going to remove all of this. We don't need any of that. And we're actually just going to come back into the 3D scene again. And what we're going to do now is for this collision shape here, we're actually going to connect some signals for this. So to do that, we're going to click on the area. We're going to come over to the node tab on the right hand side and choose signals. Now you'll notice there's a bunch of signals here for this area that we can actually attach to and listen to. The ones we're interested in are body entered and body exited. We're going to use that to tell when the player has entered the field of view and exited the field of view. So we're going to right click on this and press connect. And we're just going to leave that all as default and press connect. And you'll notice that that has gone into our enemy script and it's added a function here on area body entered. We're going to go back to the enemy and again in signals on the area, and we're going to right click on body exited, press connect, and again press connect again. So now we have two functions inside our enemy script, one for when something enters the field of view and one for when something exits the field of view. For now, what we're going to do is we're just going to simply print the body.name in both of them. So we're going to say print body.name, and actually we will just say here, we'll say body.name exited and body.name entered. We'll save that. And now we're going to press play, and we're just going to take a look down at the bottom left of our screen there where it says output. And we're just going to check to see whether or not it detects the player coming in and out. So we're going to move into the field of view. You can see it says player entered, and we're going to move out and it says player exited. Brilliant. Okay, so that's great, but we actually need some sort of visual indicator that the enemy has now detected the player. So to do that in this tutorial, what we're going to do is we're going to simply change the color of the enemy itself. Now you'll notice that we made him green, and what we're going to do is we're going to say when the player enters the field of view, we're going to change the enemy to red, and when it exits, we're going to change it back to green again, a sort of alerted state and non-alerted state. To do that, we're going to change our on-area body entered, and we're just going to call a function set color green. Actually, sorry, set color red. And on exited, we're going to say set color green. Now these functions don't exist at the moment, so we need to implement them. So we're going to say func set color red. And here what we're going to do is we're going to get a reference to our mesh instance. And we are going to say get surface material. And we're going to get the first one, which is 0 index. So we're going to say 0. And here we're just going to say set albedo, and it wants a color. So we're going to say color, and we're going to give it 1 for R, 0 for green, and 0 for blue. We're going to do the same for green, so func set color green. Again, same thing, mesh instance, get surface material 0, set the albedo, and we're going to give it a color again, 0 for red, 1 for green, and 0 for blue. Now if we save that and try it again, you'll notice that when we move into the field of view, it goes red, and when we move out, it goes green again. So red when we're inside the field of view, green when we're not. Great, okay. The next step is we're going to make the enemy look at the player once it enters the field of view. And to do that is quite simple. We've already seen this in one of my Godot quick tip videos before. In our onBody entered, what we're going to do here is we're going to actually get a reference to what body entered, and if it's the player, then we're going to set a variable called target in this script. So we're going to say var target, and here what we're going to do is we're going to say if body.isInGroup, and we're going to give it the group that we gave the player, which is player with a capital P, and we're going to say target equals body. Now all of these functions here, the print and the set color red, we're going to indent those so that they're inside this if statement as well. And we're going to do the same thing for exited, so we're going to say if body.isInGroup player, then what we're actually going to do here is we're going to say target equals null. So we're going to empty out that target variable if the player has now exited. We're going to save that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say func process. So we've seen the process function plenty of times before. Inside the process function, what we're going to do is we're going to say if target, so if we have a target, then we're going to say look at, and we're going to give it the vector that we want to look at, which is target.globalTransform.origin, and we're just going to give that the up vector 3, which is vector3.up. I'm going to save that, and let's give that a shot. So we're going to move in. You'll see that it's now looking at us, it's following us wherever we go. We can go closer, and it's going to follow us around. And if we go outside of his field of view, it goes green again, and it's no longer looking at the player. We can come all the way around here. It's not going to see us. As soon as we get in scope, it's now following us again. Great. Okay, next thing we're going to do is we're going to start to add line of sight into this. Now you'll notice if I just play this again, you'll see that I've created some sort of walls here. And now the reason I've done that is so that we can demonstrate sort of line of sight. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to come back into the world, go into the 3D view, and I'm just going to take this wall here. If we just come over here, use our select tool, take this wall here, I'm just going to move it across here so that we can sort of demonstrate line of sight a little bit easier. So let's save that. And now let's go back into our enemy. We're going to come into the script, and we're actually going to do a raycast inside our process function now. So what we're going to do is we are going to say func ready. And in order to do raycasts without creating a raycast node, which we could do, and you have seen in a previous video tutorial that we create a raycast node, we're actually going to do it directly from code here, just because it's slightly easier when it's a bit of a dynamic raycast. So we're going to need to get a reference to the current physics world and the space state within that. So we're actually going to create a variable here, so var space state. And here, inside the ready function, we're going to say space state equals, we need to do get underscore world dot direct space state. Now that space state is going to allow us to fire off a ray and see if we collide with anything. So inside this if target, we're also going to check whether or not we have a target and if the enemy can actively see that target via line of sight. So we're going to say var result equals space state dot intersect ray, and we're now going to give that a origin position and a target position. Now the origin position is ourself, so global transform dot origin. We're going to start the ray from wherever the enemy currently is, and we're going to fire the ray to the player's position, so to the target's position. So target dot global transform dot origin. Okay, so now we're going to check that result and see if it actually did collide with something. So we're going to say if result dot collider dot is in group player. So if we collided something and it is actually the player, then we are going to make it look at the player. Otherwise, we're actually going to turn the enemy green again. We're going to say set color green. And we probably don't need to do this, but let's just do it anyway, just so it's clear what we're trying to do. We're going to set the color red if we are actually colliding with the player. So if we have a target and we are in line of sight of the target, so we fired a ray from our current position to the target, if we can actually see that we've collided with the player, then we are actively looking at him. He's not blocked by any sort of other meshes in the way. Then we're going to look at the player target, and we're going to set the color to red. So we're in high alert status now. The enemy can see you, and he's going to start doing something else. Otherwise, we can't see you. You're hiding behind something, and we're going to set the color back to green. Okay, let's just put our colon on there, and let's just give that a shot. So we're going to come in. He's looking at us. He's still looking at us. We're behind a wall. He can't see us anymore. I know this is quite a low wall, but the actual ray itself would be firing at chest height here, or waist height, I should say. So he actually can't see us here. But as soon as we come out from behind the wall, you can see that he can see us again, and he goes back into his high alert status. Great. Okay, so for the final part of this video, we're actually going to make the enemy chase the player now. And that is really quite simple. What we're going to do is we're going to come into the enemy script, and we're going to create a new function here. We're going to say func, and we're going to say move to target. And this is going to take the delta. And inside here, we're going to get a direction to the target. So we're going to say var direction equals, and we're going to open some brackets because we're going to do some normalizing here. So we're going to say target dot get transform dot origin. Actually, what we can do here is we can just say transform dot origin minus, and we're going to get our own transform, so transform dot origin, and then we're going to say normalized. Now the reason we're normalizing it is because we just want a direction vector. We don't want a vector with a magnitude. We just want a vector that tells us which direction we need to look at to actually get towards the player. So we've got our direction now, and we're going to call the move and slide function, which you've seen a million times before. And we're going to do direction multiplied by speed multiplied by delta. And we're going to give it the vector3.up. Now you'll notice we don't actually have a speed variable yet. So we're just going to create that at the top. And we're going to make it exportable so we can change it in the inspector. So we're going to say export bar speed equals, and we're just going to say 100 units a second. Okay. And now what we need to do is inside our process function. So if we have a target and if we are in line of sight of the target, we're going to look at the player. We're going to set the enemy's color to red, and we're also going to move to target, and we're just going to give it the delta from the process function there. Okay, let's save that and let's give that a shot. So we're going to press play. We're going to come into the enemy's line of sight here, and you can see that he's now moving towards us. The move and slide function actually bumped him out of the ground a little bit there, which is absolutely fine. It's just because we placed him slightly under the ground. But you'll see now that he's looking at us and he's following us wherever we go. And if we now come and run behind this wall, he goes into his idle state, he goes green, he stops following us, and he stops looking at us. We come out from behind the wall, and you'll see again that he starts following us there. We go behind the wall, and he completely stops. The final thing we're going to do here is we're going to come back into the enemy scene. We're going to click on enemy, come over to groups on the right hand side, and we're just going to add this enemy to the enemies group that we created in the previous tutorials. And if we press play now and we shoot at the enemy gets killed. Simple as that. We already wrote all of the code for doing the raycast for the weapon and damaging whatever we actually hit and making it disappear if it dies. So all of that code is already hooked up for anything that is in the enemies group. So by adding that enemies group there, we've now added that functionality to this enemy as well. And that's it for today's tutorial. So we've covered some very simple enemy AI. We can do a field of view with a cone, not just a circular sort of collision area. We've got an actual field of view cone. We've got line of sight, so the enemy can respond accordingly, whether or not we're actually looking at the player or if the player is hiding behind an object. And we've done some very simple script there to make the enemy follow the player no matter where he goes. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed today's tutorial, please click that subscribe button and hit that little notification bell to get updates whenever I release a new video. And if you haven't done so already, please check out our Discord community. We have about 60 members in there at the moment, and people are asking questions, answering questions, and it's just a real great place to be if you're getting into the world of game creation. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.